remotely. And right now we will hear two very interesting presentations about environment as part of the climate and also intangible cultural heritage, which is invisible yet at the same time influences our daily life all the same. In the first session, we heard that climate change significantly affects cultural heritage. However, cultural processes and their role, including the role of intangible cultural heritage, has not been clearly articulated. The speakers of the previous session already mentioned that cultural heritage has a great potential in raising awareness about climate change and the potential effects on cultural heritage and its role as a repository of knowledge and experience. For example, we heard about construction and building in the context of CO2 emissions and use of materials within circular economy principles. Just a few comments. The next speaker comes from France, so if someone wants an interpretation into Latvian, it will be provided. Please use your headphones. So there will be simultaneous interpretation. And also there will be an opportunity to ask a question in Latvian, which will be interpreted into English, if you may want to ask a question. So please use your microphone and headphones. And just like in the previous session, there is still the opportunity to ask questions using the Slido platform. So you can submit your own questions. They can be anonymous. You can also sign your name if you want. And then we can discuss these questions together after the presentations. So now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, John Prunier.
Lunch. Great to see you. We'll be joining in a second. John Prunier ir Koal mākslas.
Ms. Prunier is the project manager of Koal, Association of the Contemporary Art, Ecology and Research Professionals. She is a representative from France. And she has been a member of Koal since 2008. And this association is aimed at promoting biodiversity and ecology. They implement hundreds of programs, and they're a part of also a broader network involving many organizations.
We'll be thankful to hear your experience. John, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the invitation, and I hope the lunch break was good. So yeah, I'm Joan Prunier from Koal Association, and I will talk about the very much link between cultural and natural heritage, and to our point of view, culture can help very much natural heritage, and this is all linked, and the reciprocity also is very interesting between natural and cultural heritage. And I would like to start with a quote from the philosopher and naturalist Aldo Leopold, who said, and I really very much like this quote: "We stand guard over works of art, but species representing the work of eons are stolen from under our noses." That means that this sentence underlines the current problematic concerning the natural heritage with regard to the cultural heritage, and how the two are finally very connected, because humans are very attached to protecting the cultural heritage, whereas our nature work of arts are, well, threatened. So this is evidenced nowadays in Paris, in Louvre. I don't know if you heard of these actions, but there were recent actions of vandalism at the Louvre in Paris, where activists threw soup on work of art in a way to denounce this discrepancy between the fate of our natural heritage and our cultural heritage. And well, this question is very interesting to deal with, because these were work of arts representing nature. And so, well, we can talk about it also later. So what I wanted to say in this introduction is that the notion of heritage has this enormous power to make us precisely stand guard, as Aldo Leopold said. And this notion has a strength together under the same name, cultural and natural heritage, which in fact are very much linked. Since the first measure to protect natural areas was adopted in France in 1861, before Yellowstone, and this measure was carried by artists. It was in the forest of Fontainebleau, and that became Fontainebleau Art Reserves. And in Coal Association, we are very sensible with the fact that how, in the name of beauty and art, we can also protect the environment. The climate crisis multiplies hybrid objects that are half cultural and half natural, actually. I could take the example of wrecks and underwater ships, which are colonized by sponges and living creatures, and they become hybrid object between nature and culture. I just wanted to talk about these examples of hybridation and how the modernity and the ecological crisis also create some hybrid heritage, actually, between human constructions, boats, and natural beings. So I will share a presentation to show how Coal Association work in promoting this link between natural and cultural heritage. So Coal was born out of this hybridization of issues. Coal is a cross between the protection of biodiversity and cultural practices, with the desire to form a real plea, a real advocacy for culture, and to defend the essential role of culture and art in the ecological transition. Because we are very much convinced that aesthetics is at least as strong as politics and economics, and that, beauty and wonder can be a tool in the struggle for climate transition. So today, Coal Association celebrates its 15th birthday. It was created in 2008. And we can see that we have seen the emergence of a real ecological art scene I'm showing now the early beginnings of what we call the ecological art. Here we can see a work, very famous artwork from Agnes Denis in the 80s, which is a wheat field in Manhattan. And these were the very beginnings of the ecological art, how artists could, really act for climate sensibilization and biodiversity issues. and how today, so this is a work from the Koal Prize 2021, artists can also raise awareness about the deforestation of Amazonia. So here's a work of art about it. And I wanted to show you also what was presented in Paris in 2015 for the COP21, which was also a very famous work of art, talking about the ice melting and in the very center of Paris. So, well, just to talk about this emergence of the ecological art scene and to promote this new culture of nature. Well, this was the sentence from Aldo Leopold that is very well relevant. To promote this new culture of nature, Koal develops many projects by linking cultural and natural diversity of actors and territories. We work both with the Ministry of Culture and Ministry of Environment. And because more and more artists are working with and for natural heritage, and in the reciprocity, more and more naturalists in charge of natural heritage are working with artists. So this is something that we see more than ever, is the link between the two fields of actor. So I will say that it is not only cultural and natural heritage as an answer to climate change, but this is cultural with natural heritage as an answer to climate change. So, as I said, Koal was created in 2008 by professionals in contemporary art, landscape design, and philosophy who came together to involve artists and culture and in the ecological transition. And to this end, the aim was to create a new ecological art scene, because who better than artists to raise our awareness? Our main and first action is the Koal Prize, which is an international art prize, which was created in 2010 precisely to identify and reveal artists committed to ecology, because we must say that in 2010, this question was really not easy to ask. And now everybody's talking about ecology and the link with artists and ecology. But in 2010, it was not a frequent question. So the Koal Prize was created to identify and reveal these artists. And today, 15 years later, these questions are being asked almost everywhere, especially after the pandemic. And well, the Koal Prize has become an international meeting place for contemporary art. I have to announce that we are now launching our 2023 edition of the Koal Prize. So we invite all the artists around the world to answer the question of plants and vegetal world. I just put here the image on the top right of this slide, so don't hesitate to share this call for projects. You can also see the other open call of different years. And talking about the Koal Prize, I just wanted to make a zoom on one project, the winner of the Koal Prize 2022, because it is very much linked with this question of natural and cultural heritage. Marina Giotti, an Italian a Greek artist who presented this project called Sounding the Silent World, which is about wrecks and underwater ships. Because UNESCO grants protected cultural heritage status to wrecks over 100 years old, but recent wreck ships remain in a legal limbo, and the artist wanted to question the destiny of these recent wrecks. And her project aspires to explore the past and present state of wrecks and their derelict boats that are a major source of marine pollution. And she has a wonderful project about this question. I wanted also to talk about the student prize that we created in 2019 because it has a very interesting residency program in the Natural Reserve of France. So this is a French open call, and we have in France 357 natural reserve all around the territory, and it is wonderful how these natural actors now call the artists and here student artists to come to their reserve and to create in the reserve and to raise awareness on the issue of the reserve. So here is a good example also of how culture can help nature heritage. This is the example of Coal Student Prize. This was the first main action on Coal Prize. I also wanted to talk quickly, and I'm just checking the time. I think I have 15 minutes more. So we also create a lot of exhibitions. And for example, here you have some pictures of exhibitions, but I can also talk about this International Biennale of Contemporary Art of Anglet in France. And it was very interesting in 2021 to talk about coastal issues on the coastal line through art. So here you can see some of the pictures of the work of art dealing with the sea level rise and all these coastal issues on site. You can also see our territory programs. So what Coal also promotes the emergence of a culture of ecology and transformation of territories through art by developing artistic programs specifically designed for the territories in which they take place. So here is an example of one program called Nature in Solidum, who takes place in a regional park in France. I'm just checking what is okay, only 5-6 minutes. Sorry, I will go a little bit quicker. I wanted to talk about this program because these are 3 artistic residences inside the park. And again, how artists can deal with ecological issues, very local issues, and how how COAL can accompany the artistic valorization of different territories. Well, now I go ahead and I wanted to talk about the other projects that we launch in order to bring together cultural and ecological actors. So this is the Forest Nights, which is a festival in the forest, and we create an artistic program in order to raise awareness on the forest issues. Here you can see some pictures of the events of last year. We also have this wonderful project linked now with a more urban context, which is the context of the Greater Paris. And I don't have much time to explain, but this is an artist who works with vegetal and plants, and who questions the issue of vegetalization in these big constructions, urban constructions. We also have a project about threatened birds, the Audubon Mural Project that you can see here on the pictures, how art can also raise awareness on this natural heritage threatened, that are birds, on the walls of our cities. We also launched some cultural agenda and cultural seasons linked to the political agenda of ecology, and this was the occasion to bring together the actors of the ecology and the actors of the culture, the cultural world. Yeah, and at the end, to present some of our project, this is also one beautiful project called The Table and the Territory. I just wanted to cite this project because I think it talks about the intangible heritage, which is gastronomy. And this is also an heritage between culture and on the topic of sustainable food. So, well, I hope it was clear what I presented, because we have many projects, but I wanted to conclude and finish this speech with just an overview of how artists and culture can help understanding climate change issues. And the first range of action that artists can make is this testimony and sharing of knowledge. So there are many artists who give a face and who represent the Anthropocene, who make the ecological crisis perceptible. That is to say, the hidden pollution, the depletion of resources, but also the richness of the living. And well, these are very much art and science approaches. So we have many kinds of this approaches. We can also see political and symbolic actions. So how artists can write new narratives, new utopias and dystopias, and invent new tools for actions, and especially new legal tools. I go ahead. You have this third branch of practices, which are artists who intend to act directly on the level of ecosystem and who invent a new way to restore and repair them. And at the end, a new range of practices who are a bit more spiritual, and how artists can help also reconstruct an intimate link with the living. Thank you for listening to the presentation. I hope it was clear enough, and sorry for the big amount of information.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the presentation. Indeed. Fantastic, Maria. We just covered, and I think some fantastic points you've made in regards to the capacity of art and artistic practices to highlight and seem to be out of touch for many people, because in my country there's no flooding, there's no eviction, so it seems that there's no climate change. So thank you so much for sharing. We'll be going on with the next presentation, so thank you so much and for the call, and we'll be quite grateful for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, to sum up what Madame Prunier said, a lot of subjects have been touched upon about culture and climate. Culture and art, the arts are a And now let's switch to other issues of climate, culture and at the University of Latvia. She's going to tell us about the climate change. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks for having me. It is really a great honor for me to present a subject that is, of course, very broad. Where is my presentation? Just a second. So my subject is really very broad, but I'll try to keep with the time that I was allotted. The subject is really very multifaceted, but I would like to sketch out the complexity of this topic and maybe mention some key words that you have already heard. So, the fact that climate change is global is well known to us. And there is an intergovernmental panel for climate management, and they work with the data regularly. In this context, I'd like to show you Latvia. Because if we take Latvia in particular, it is not the world in general, but over the last 30 years, climate studies have been very significant. We are based on data. This is what we are used to see around the world. But what about the observations in Latvia? We have 25 observation stations. And the length of is the greatest changes. You can see the figures. These are these months. So the greatest changes are in winter months. And these are the climate. The figures are placed the other way around, but you have to pay attention to the winter months. They are facing the greatest changes. What is the most example? These were the strong rains that came very unexpectedly, as the already mentioned case with Sigulda in 2014, where for 6 hours the amount of rain was typical for a case that happens once every 1,000 years. And in Europe too, in the upper corner of the slide, there is a climate portal that has created the map with the strength of rain. And you can see the blue color shows where the rain volumes have increased significantly. Here you can see only colors, and it is based on Zaneta Avotnietsa and her promotion thesis. This is based on studies and research. So climate experts have prepared indices that are the basis for the atypical period, tropical night, Latvia. Some consequences are also beneficial for us that we can use for our here. And you have seen in the previous presentations about the sea shores, what we are worried about, the sea coastal line. According to the guidelines from 2014, the risks of erosion shown in red. Without going into detail, this cannot all be subscribed to climate change. It would be wrong. This is not a fact. There is also the activity of humanity. But as for the risk of climate change, here we can say that it applies in the autumn-winter storms. The way winds and storms that are very negative for our seashores, and this influences this erosion. As for the future, there is also some positive news that it is not forecast that these storms will increase in winters in future. So the level of intensity could be smaller. So each storm can be more intensive because of other factors. So here there is this various types of changes. So phenological trends, as I wanted to show you the broadest possible picture, the phenological trends have their own numbers. There are research pieces and in Latvia too, and we count when we can show the signs of each stage. Climate has always been changing, not only now but historically. There have always been climatic changes, but the intensity that we can observe now has not been present for the previous centuries. As for the impact, starting from the climate policy strategy and adaptation strategy, and first research pieces were made, we have chosen 6 areas for research. Here you can see that it is agriculture and forestry, And the most significant risks, they are very multifaceted. But which is the most significant, one can ask. So maybe we lack information about all the areas where we can argue for a certain risk. What else I wanted to show you to make you sure that it is not only urban landscape, and if we talk about cultural heritage, it's also nature that we can see that temperatures, if we only take the increased temperatures, they can lead to a whole chain of other changes. A certain example, and each slide you can see who has been, for example, the Salaca River catchment area, or it can be decrease of ice volume, the throughput, the chemical changes, amount of oxygen, which is extremely important for ecological quality. We can also see biological change, which is related to structural, functional changes and biogeographical changes, where we have seen new species enter Latvia and feel good in our conditions. So it is really very broad. Cultural heritage is not only urban environment, but also natural environment, where this ecosystem has a lot of complex changes going on. And as for Riga, the biggest trends are, of course, these floods, where rivers are full. Just one strong shower rain shows that our current sewage system is not shower sewage system is not enough for such extreme weather events. There are other moments as well. Of course, it's most easy to speak about such events straight after they happen, because when we all are more alerted. Now we have already forgotten about it and feel relaxed, so this problem becomes less topical. This is a case from the land surface data, 5th of June 2019, where we had heat waves during a spell of hot weather. And with the heat waves, they are mostly observed in the shopping malls, and the risks are very broad. That can remain just for idea for students. I hope I managed to keep on time. Thank you. Maybe we'll take questions later, and now thank you for your attention. We thank Agrita, and please take a seat in our presidium. We thank Madam Breda, Director of the Master Study Program in Geography of the University of Latvia and a researcher. Now we would like to invite an expert in archaeology and history, Yanis. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank the National Commission of UNESCO for the an archaeologist. I'm not an underwater archaeologist. The underwater archaeology doesn't exist in Latvia as a science, and we know too much about it, and this is why it is even more important to be aware of that and to talk about it. And so I would like to start my presentation with saying what we have precious in the Baltic Sea, why we have to preserve it, impact it, what are the risks. And then I'd like to speak about the indirect climate change that are related to these issues, including the economic pressure that can negatively impact the underwater heritage. And maybe for the further thinking, we could think about further possible forecasted impact. The UNESCO documents divide everything in the various groups, the intangible, tangible, and we can show you our palaces and paintings and prove that it is valuable, ancient, and has to be preserved and be a source of our potential. But with the archaeological heritage, it's much more difficult because visually we are not able to see these values. They are under ground, and it is difficult to take someone even to an ancient settlement or hill fort and to prove to them why it was precious. And with underwater heritage, it is even more complicated because majority of us will never start scuba diving. We will never see this heritage with our own eyes. There are technological opportunities, but still, and especially in the Baltic Sea, which is cold, dark, with low visibility, it is a very unwelcoming environment. This is why quite often the Baltic Sea is a place for the heritage. For example, this white porcelain jar is just a small point in a huge depth. But still, if some of us will go in for scuba diving, most probably it will be somewhere closer to the equator in the Red Sea, for example, and you will see the wreck of some iron ship, for example, or maybe some objects that have been placed underwater on purpose for divers, but we will not see a shipwreck. Probably the most we can see will be some jars. Meanwhile, in Latvia, in the Baltic Sea, we can find a wooden shipwreck in its entirety, with all its wooden elements. There are no other seas in the world with such a rich heritage of shipwrecks as the Baltic Sea. And the reason is because it is dark, cold, and with low salinity. This is why it has special conditions for the shipwrecks to be preserved. The things that destroy shipwrecks are these Terreda navalis, the so-called naval shipworms, which are actually marine bivalve mollusks. And while the Baltic Sea water is cold, dark, and with a low salinity, we will have no such naval shipworms. At the same time, we can only imagine what would happen if the water of the Baltic Sea became warmer and salter. Then these shipworms could start reproducing. Then these beautiful wooden shipwrecks, especially close to Finland and Sweden, that they would be destroyed very, very quickly. In literally a couple of years, these wrecks that represent an entire ship would only have a small trace. There would be no more ship. Other conditions, of course, not only this life nature, but also the chemical composition of water impacts the level of preservation. For example, the metal ships in warm and salty water are faster get corrosion. In 1990, there was a ship close to the United States, Miami state, that has sunk, and now it is in much worse conditions than any ship that is now in the Baltic Sea, that is 100 years older, for example. So it is related both to the wooden and to metal ships. We have already discussed the storms and erosion, and just as the coastal line, the same the erosion applies to the objects that are underwater. That applies both to the shipwrecks close to the coastline and underwater. So during this erosion, the ancient objects coming from the ancient times can be fully destroyed, and also the shipwrecks, because there are, for example, some sediments that are currently protecting shipwrecks, but they can be destroyed as a result of a storm. An example of the erosion of the coastline. There was a news in September 2021 when a shipwreck was discovered in Riga. It was shown to the public, but then it was very quickly covered in soil again in order for it to remain protected. But that didn't help a lot, because the erosion was much faster than we have anticipated. So when last year it was revisited, it was because of the coastal erosion, 1.5 meters of the coastal line was destroyed. These were the processes of nature and environment. But there is another very significant effect related to the climate change, and it is the economic pressure. As we all know, we are trying to use the least possible fossil fuels. We are looking for greener alternatives everywhere around the world, including in the Baltic Sea. We have plans for sea farms, and these offshore wind farms are not just these wind generators, but there is also an entire infrastructure of underwater electricity cable network. It is the entire process of their mounting and construction, and it all depends on us, on how we want to manage this construction process, because the sea is the place where we have to take into account all the requirements, including the impact on the environment, and that includes also area. Maybe China, some naval shipworm will eat another piece of a shipwreck. It is not under our control, but these offshore wind farms are entirely under our climate change impact. Well, there are some possible philosophical issues that could help us in the search of this answer. First, we might evaluate our position and adopt a philosophical or political decision. Do we allow the cultural heritage to be destroyed? That would be a hands-off approach. Or do we take action and protect the heritage? That would be hands-on. If the destruction of a cultural heritage object is unavoidable, then we have to carry out a scientific study of it, and who is financing it? Is it the one to blame? Some aggressive solutions for protecting the heritage object, such as, for example, dikes, embankments, artificial carpets, or green energy projects such as wind farms often have a huge ecological footprint. And are they justified? Is it justified to invest huge resources and in global terms potentially cause even more damage to the environment? I don't have answers to these questions. They are too complicated, but it would be very useful for us to sometimes think about these aspects while we are planning our work. And now I would like to say something that would be similar to some answers or suggestions. The first thing that I would like to say, and probably it has already mentioned here, and so it would be useful for us to perceive the protection of nature and cultural heritage as an interlinked, uniform process. Relevant declarations have already existed for quite a long Another point, it would be useful to draw some practical plans that would be realistic for managing the underwater heritage. And we would have to pay attention to both the natural and the cultural aspect. And third point, we have to look for balanced and sustainable solutions. For example, the rebuilding of the existing jetties and dikes, meandering of straightened rivers, ground covers, planting natural underwater defenses, and so on. And I think that we have to do straight away, especially thinking about the wind farms and green energy and cultural heritage have to come together and create a joint plan of recommendations that would be mutually harmonized, how we can introduce these elements, how we can evaluate environment, how we can manage it all. We have great mistakes that have been made elsewhere, and we can make it all more meaningful. Thank you.
Paldies.
Thank you, Mr. Meinerts, expert at the Archaeology and History Department of the National Cultural Heritage Board and researcher at the Latvian Academy of Culture. And now let us start the discussion. I would also like to invite Ms. Katarina Kukaina, Chair of the Board of ICOMOS Latvia. Everyone has an opportunity to ask questions using the Slido platform. In this panel, we have 3 speakers. We will talk about climate, culture, and environment, and I am sure we will have a very lively discussion. The first question I would like to ask to Ms. Agrida Brieda. Many areas, not just a single area. Of course, could you say that there should be a consensus that yes, there is climate change in Latvia? Yes, for sure. in my presentation, I really wanted to underline this, that based on our observations, looking at the average values, at the extreme values that I showed you on the slide, yes, most certainly there is climate change in Latvia. If we look at the Baltic states, changes in each of the three countries are quite similar. Latvia is located between Estonia and Lithuania. And in some parameters, these trends are perhaps even more pronounced than we could expect, especially when it comes to precipitation. It is unclear why there should be more precipitation in Latvia. Now I would like to ask for a comment from Ms. Kukana. Today's focus is cultural heritage and cultural knowledge, and using this knowledge in communicating about these processes and also using cultural practices. Scientists tell us that climate change exists, and the question is, so what? So what that it is happening? Are there any instruments at the disposal of cultural heritage organizations or perhaps UNESCO that we could use to say, no, yes, we should do something to preserve this heritage in spite of climate change? When we looked at the first word cloud, we saw that everyone is responsible for climate change and everyone is affected by climate change. All of the environment. And also, Ms. Anna Jakobson in her presentation also mentioned that ecology is a way how we understand our environment, our living environment. And then we can achieve a greener lifestyle more aligned with natural principles. And here, an important role is knowledge about traditional systems, for example, in agriculture, as already mentioned before, but also when living in urban environments. The interaction between culture and nature that we live in and management aspects of these landscapes are where we could also help target these issues further. The topic of today's seminar involves both climate culture and quality of life, but of them. We preserve a culture, but we lose quality of life. But this heritage approach shows that this is not the case. We have lived for centuries, and there are some more questions. Baltic Sea, we heard that the Baltic Sea is quite dark, cold, and less salty. How many objects of cultural heritage could be located in the Baltic Sea altogether? Are there perhaps some hidden pearls? So let's say Latvia Sunokia, some special object that is located. I shall say that these objects would make a very enormous museum of 2006. We attempted to count all these objects, 1,000 various shipwrecks when we counted back in 2006, but today we could say that there could even be over 20,000 shipwrecks. Yes, there's more awareness about the sea landscape. There are more shipwrecks. The total number of shipwrecks could be between 20 and 30,000. Not all of them have high cultural or historic value, and some of them are dangerous for the environment because there's oil or some other substances on board of these shipwrecks. The question is, how do we balance these aspects? We need to preserve these cultural heritage objects, but we also need to protect nature from oil spills. In Latvia, there's relatively little knowledge about shipwrecks, but you mentioned that there could be 30,000. It seems as though that is quite a lot. Near the coast of Latvia, we have registered approximately 350 cases where a ship has sunk, and we have the coordinates for approximately 160 of these ships. But what would be the answer? Better to use the hands-on or hands-off approach? You spoke about the wind farms. That could be one of the top questions that we could ask at this moment, especially in the context of Russia's war in Ukraine. It was clear that we probably need to build these wind farms, but the question is what we should do about these projects. Can there be a practical solution? Can we adopt actual resolutions with some practical outcomes? We heard that perhaps the existing legislation is enough, but how can we move forward from the hands-off to a more active approach? In one of the slides of my presentation, I showed you a picture about a document from Germany, Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. They have already written down all the most important issues. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We can use this document created by German colleagues, translate into Latvian, and sign it and say that, yes, this is an example of best practice. This way we could avoid mistakes made by other countries already in the past. This would be a very simple measure. Ms. Briede, do you think we could ask scientists for their recommendation about a certain step or a recommendation, for example, when it comes to building these wind parks, or how they will affect the basin of the sea? I think there are different aspects that we need to take into account. First of all is the risk of erosion and possible impact. Secondly, we need to look at the cultural and historic heritage and assess what is our priority and what should be taken into account. When it comes to climate change, we need to balance, we need to make a cost and benefit analysis, we need to assess the risks and analyze the situation. If we look at a study made in Germany, I'm not sure if we can make a recommendation by just translating it into Latvian. Well, the issue is not what location to choose for the wind farm. This is quite a complicated process. What I wanted to say is that there already are specific documents about how to guide this process when we decide to implement such a project. What are the steps, how we obtain permits, what do we do to minimize the impact on our heritage. I think it would be difficult to create a document without your help. I think that nobody who wants to build a wind farm would say, hey, we need another complicated document and we need to come up with something extra to make life harder for ourselves. I would like to add that some students have also written their master's thesis, studied the attitudes of local people regarding the construction of wind farms. We need to talk to these people, because there are many people who would say, not in my backyard. There will be changes in the landscape, in the environment, and the initial response is usually negative. They want to build them, but not in their backyard. Of course, this will take time, and it will take time to determine which location would be the best and bring the best results for us. Let us imagine in the future, perhaps a year and a half later, there is a UNESCO working group established, and the question is, would academics support such an initiative? Because we would probably need the engagement of academic community to help and create such a document, so that this coastline should look like. I want a more practical approach, how it could look like. I think that, yes, scientists would be willing to discuss these issues, scientists from various fields, they would be ready to do that. And UNESCO could help communicate this issue in a simple and understandable way, and a more practical way. Yes, Mr. Maynard. Yes, I would like to also comment quickly, because I mentioned that there are no academics in Latvia when it comes to underwater archaeology. This field is simply not established in Latvia yet. We need to do what we can. Information that we could borrow from our neighbors. Cooperating and exchanging information is very valuable. I also cooperate with the Council of Ministers of the Council of the Baltic Sea States in the underwater working group, and here we discuss about the underwater management process in other Baltic states as well. I think we are talking not just about the shipwrecks, about the coastline as well, about national identity, how we manage our country, how we manage our coastline, because the coastline might be receding, and this is why I would like to ask you, do we have a community that could be ready to cooperate and prepare a resolution and recommendations? Would it be like a tentative yes? Tentative willingness? Yes, thank you for your approval, and thank you for the discussion. Thank you to all the panelists of this session. And the next speakers have joined us remotely. And we have speakers from Finland. The next speakers will be Elisa Krateri, coordinator of the Live-In project of the Finnish Heritage Agency, and her colleague. The second speaker of the next presentation, Leena Marcio, and she is the senior advisor of the Finnish Heritage Agency, and also she's coordinating the implementation of the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention in Finland. And she is also the initiator of the Live-In project.
Hello? Can you hear us?
Leena, would you put your microphone on?
Great. Great, fantastic. That always helps. Microphone on, it always helps, especially in presentations. So Elisa Krateri, Leena, you're with us. We're happy to have you here in Riga and in Parliament, nonetheless. Okay?
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Just a second. I will start the sharing of the screen here.
So good day, everyone. Nice to see you. Would be great to be on board in person as well, but many greetings from Quaithray Espoo here up in the north. Elisa, can you still put it to the...
You are not.
Yes, now it's great. Okay, pleasure to meet you. I'm Leena Marcio, the coordinator of the UNESCO Convention on Intangible Heritage, and it's such a pleasure to be able to bring this viewpoint to your event today as well. So warm thank you on the invitation. So we will today talk a bit about the role of intangible cultural heritage or living heritage. We use both terms in the same meaning, and we will also tell you a bit about the project we've been busy with Elisa and with our various partners from Nordic and Baltic countries and Poland in the past years. So in the first slide, intangible cultural heritage is still a rather new concept. So maybe you know that UNESCO we are art, so we're culture. They might now be like, oh, we are actually intangible living cultural heritage. All of the Baltic and Nordic countries are part of this UNESCO convention. So we sort of have this common framework. And in this convention, sustainable development is one of the key concepts. And I think me and my colleagues, we are well aware of the Agenda 2030. And this project, this cooperation that we're doing with these many countries is one concrete way to bring it down to the grassroots level. We all need to work on sustainable development, but how could we do this in concrete? UNESCO is giving us a hand. There are tools from UNESCO, a toolkit on intangible heritage and sustainability. Here in this slide, this beautiful picture, it's from Dive into ICH, a website about all the more than 600 elements in the intangible cultural heritage lists. They are those small little dots on the picture, and then how they are linking to each and every of the 17 SDGs. There are training materials online and 33 case studies. Here's just a slide about the convention. So we are 180 state parties at the moment. So it's a powerful network. And the work with intangible heritage and hundreds of communities and heritage elements is taking place all over the world all the time. In addition, there's a big number of accredited NGOs supporting the work. Communities, heritage practitioners, they are in the heart of the convention. It's a sister to the World Heritage Convention. Just to quickly have a look on intangible heritage, in case it is a new concept to some of you in the audience, it's about the representation, expressions, knowledge, and skills that we people have, that we share among each other, which is part of our identities. And I mean, people can easily think that we have a thing called culture. When you're making policies, it's culture. There you have heritage, and somewhere in the corner there is a thing called intangible cultural heritage. But we strongly believe as intangible heritage is a key part of who we are, what our values are, what are we choosing. It's really in the core of making things in a more sustainable way. The idea with the convention is to safeguard different kind of traditions. It's about ensuring the viability. But we think that in sustainability discussions and questions, and also on climate change, these traditions play a strong role. Also, as the UNESCO Convention or UNESCO tells us, it's something that is transmitted from generation to generation. Living heritage is a source of community-based resilience, which can be a driver of sustainable development in many different ways. In practice, what it is, here in the pictures is some of nice heritage elements we share among our countries. But it can be about social practices, oral traditions, performing arts, craftsmanship, or knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. So communities, or each and every one of us, holds a significant amount of knowledge of our environment. In our social practices, how we celebrate Christmas, what do we eat on Midsummer's Festival, what kind of stories from our nature and environments do we transmit to our children, how are these things visible in performing arts, or what kind of materials do we create our crafts, what kind of materials we use, do we mend our clothes or do we buy a new thing every time? So in practice, intangible heritage is tied to our values and how we live and what we transmit. It's about ways of spending our free time. Do we go to the shopping mall, or do also our youngsters think that hanging out in the woods nearby is a good thing to do? It affects our choices as consumers. It's about locally rooted knowledge and practices that provide a source of resilience against changing climate conditions. Agenda 2030, this is a thing we called the flower of living heritage. So in this beautiful picture, we have linked all of the 17 SDGs into what in practice living heritage can do, how can it participate in making the Agenda 2030 real and in concrete. The picture is based on in a UNESCO, but we have made it into exactly what is living heritage about. But there you see, for example, the positive impacts of crafts, for example, on people's health and well-being, or traditional knowledge and skills relating to sustainable energy use in production on number 7. Or number 11, living heritage in urban planning and village and neighborhood activities. Or 15, sustainable living heritage related to living close to nature and forests, traditional methods, knowledge and skills.
Okay, and now it would be time to take a closer look to this living project and what it is about and how this relates to the SDG flower that Leena just showed and explained to you. So the whole name of this living project is Creative and Living Cultural Heritage as a resource for the Northern Dimension region. It's a project that started in September 21, continues until May 24, and is coordinated by us at the Finnish Heritage Agency. The main financier for this initiative is the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, and the funds relate actually to this Northern Dimension policy and activities. It's co-funded, of course, by our home-based agency, the Finnish Heritage Agency, and also by the Northern Dimension Partnership on Culture that is actually based in Riga. The total budget is around 460,000 euros. As mentioned, we have 9 countries participating in this project, and they come from the Nordic countries, the Baltic countries, and Poland. So it's covering this region of the Northern Dimension. We are really following the similar path as what Leena just explained earlier. So this is building on those cornerstones that include the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. Really a backbone to this all is this convention that Leena introduced to you, the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage by UNESCO. But also we refer to the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of Diversity and the framework for the value of cultural heritage for society known as the Faro Convention. So these are the big parts, and really we are trying to get from this multidimensional collage, as we could call this collection of 17 SDGs, and try to narrow it down a bit more in this project. So instead of the SDGs alone, we are instead of the SDGs alone, we are also looking at the aspects of sustainability to help us discuss living heritage in all of these different aspects of sustainability: economic, ecological, social, and cultural sustainability. And indeed, in the couple of next slides, we will look into how we do this into living work. How do we put this into action, the drive and the thrill to achieve the SDGs? It's a vast problem. The questions are huge. So let's face it together. Let's explore it together. What can we do? What does it mean in practice? I took here a copy from our joint online working environment on HowSpace that we used when we were, among us, the partners of the project, preparing for international webinars about living heritage and sustainability in its different ways. For example, we asked our partners to vote what kind of topics they were mostly interested. For example, in the question, does living heritage or traditions and habits have to change? Yes, but how then? That's one topic that we can address as such. Then another topic, in which ways living heritage could help to mitigate the climate change consequences. And what do we do? So we are posing questions, we are pondering and reflecting on them together. We are admitting that these are difficult questions. We think together which questions we would like to ask, and then we selected a few experts from here and there and asked them to give their keynote lectures and listen to them, and also to hear from local experiences from projects that have already been done. And then we gathered together to discuss and share viewpoints together. Indeed, we are in this project comprehending and learning together in a joint learning process. But also what is essential for this project is taking these big goals, the vast issues, on the practical level, on the local level, to test those things in practice. With this project, we have been able to fund altogether 20 smaller pilot projects. So this means really small testings that only last for a few months. And we have been able to have this project all over this project area that is visualized here as a map. These pilot projects really address the different aspects of sustainability. So we have pilot cases from ecological sustainability to cultural and social, and also economic sustainability. In the next slide, we will take a short view of these. I have selected 3 pilot projects that are just starting, or have been, actually one is already completed and going on to the second part already. But let's see. First of all, I have here very topical to this to today's theme, the Land pilot project from Seyðisfjörður in Iceland, where they are grasping this issue at the local level with the local community in very practical ways with children and the young together, learning basically to accustom to the changing climate there in Seyðisfjörður, where the warming ocean is having consequences for the traditional fishing culture, for example. From Latvia, we have a case from Dienvidkurzeme County with the capital in Aizpute, where the Serde, the interdisciplinary art group, is based. They are focusing on topics how through these fermented food projects they could increase awareness about food traditions and in general about consumption habits, especially among younger generations, and to keep up with these fine traditions that you have in Latvia in cuisine. And lastly, I have here as an example from Lithuania, They focus there on the sustainability of the Varena Mushroom Festival that takes place in southern Lithuania in the Dzūkija region. And this is also, they started already last summer and they have been visiting the place and took part in the festival. Now they are working forward really to create these plans on how to develop this festival in ways that will make it better regarding the participation, but also the tradition of picking mushrooms in the region. Actually, I was going to say about the example from Aispudar region, or that from that corner of your country, that this is also taking place together with the Cultural Center of Latvia. That is one of our dear partners in this project. But let's move on. What we also do in this project, we have also focus on research, and we are also heading or admitting to policy needs.